This week on The Inside Story, world leaders condemn Israel following a deadly strike on a humanitarian aid convoy. This as we approach the 6-month anniversary of Hamas's deadly October 7 attacks in Israel. And we tell you what you need to know this week about the upcoming U.S. presidential election. Now, on The Inside Story, Flashpoint Israel-Hamas.
Welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Steve Karish. A top U.S. official says the White House is outraged at news of an Israeli airstrike into Gaza that killed 7 workers from the aid group World Central Kitchen, causing the group to halt their life-saving operations there. In the wake of the deadly strike, the Biden administration is calling on Israel to do more to protect civilians and humanitarian aid workers alike. VOA's senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports from the State Department.
The World Central Kitchen aid group, which feeds people suffering due to natural disasters and wars, says it has suspended operations in Gaza after an Israeli airstrike hit its convoy as it was leaving a warehouse loaded with food. A U.S. official confirmed a dual U.S.-Canadian citizen was among the 7 killed. The armored cars carrying food were clearly branded with the WCK logo. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby had this reaction during Tuesday's press briefing.
We were outraged to learn of an IDF strike that killed a number of civilian humanitarian workers yesterday from the World Central Kitchen, which has been relentless in working to get food to those who are hungry in Gaza and, quite frankly, around the world.
World Central Kitchen is run by celebrity chef Jose Andres. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said President Joe Biden reached out to Andres.
The president conveyed he is grieving with the entire World Central Kitchen family. The president felt it was important to recognize the tremendous contribution World Central Kitchen has made to the people in Gaza and people around the world. The president conveyed he will make clear to Israel that humanitarian aid workers must be protected.
Standing with his French counterpart on a visit to Paris, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called the aid workers heroes who must be protected.
We've spoken directly to the Israeli government about this particular incident. We've urged a swift, a thorough, and impartial investigation to understand exactly what happened.
French Foreign Minister Stéphane Séjourné was more direct in condemning the Israeli strike.
Allow me, first of all, to express our strong condemnation of the Israeli strike that led to the deaths of 7 humanitarian workers from the NGO World Central Kitchen. Protecting humanitarian workers is a moral and legal imperative that everyone must adhere to.
Israel's military on Tuesday expressed sincere sorrow over the airstrike and said officials are reviewing the incident at the highest levels. Relief experts say Palestinian children and families are on the brink of starvation, and this attack will only make things worse. The war between Israel and Hamas began last October 7th when Hamas militants stormed into southern Israel, killing some 1,200 people. Israel has responded with a 6-month-old offensive, killing some 33,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza's health ministry. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
World Central Kitchen founder, Chef Jose Andres, responded to the strike in a New York Times opinion piece published on Wednesday, saying, quote, "Israelis know that food is not a weapon of war. Israel is better than the way this war is being waged. It is better than blocking food and medicine to civilians. It is better than killing aid workers who had coordinated their movements with the Israel Defense Forces. In the worst conditions, after the worst terrorist attack in its history, it's time for the best of Israel to show up. You cannot save the hostages by bombing every building in Gaza. You cannot win this war by starving an entire population." End quote. Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu called the incident a tragic accident. The U.S.-based NGO, World Central Kitchen, was established by Chef Jose Andres and his wife Patricia following a 2010 earthquake in Haiti to deliver food to survivors. The group has since expanded to provide meals and support to survivors of other disasters, as well as refugees and those affected by conflict. And where there is conflict or disaster, you're likely to find World Central Kitchen. It's served tens of millions of meals in Ukraine alone since Russia's 2022 invasion. According to World Central Kitchen, they've served more than 43 million meals in Gaza, in addition to nearly 2 million in Israel, to those displaced by Hezbollah rocket fire from the north. In Gaza, the group is part of the first shipment of aid via sea corridor from Cyprus in March. A second maritime shipment carrying some 332 tons of food was due to arrive in Gaza, but Andre says World Central Kitchen is pausing operations in the Palestinian enclave. Citizens from Australia, Britain, Gaza, and Poland were among the 7 killed in the Israeli strike. On Easter Sunday, from Vatican City in Rome, Pope Francis delivered comments to a packed crowd urging peace and calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
I appeal once again that access to humanitarian aid be ensured in Gaza and call once more for the prompt release of the hostages seized on October 7th and for an immediate ceasefire in the Strip. Let us not allow the current hostilities to continue to have grave repercussions on the civil population and, above all, the children.
While much of the world is focused on the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, the conflict also causes disagreement inside Israel. Israel has ordered a number of Palestinian hospital patients back to the Gaza Strip after they're done with treatment in East Jerusalem medical facilities. VOA correspondent Linda Gradstein leads our team on the ground there. As Linda reports, the order has sparked outcry from human rights groups, and the Israeli Supreme Court has put their transfer on hold.
In East Jerusalem's Muqasset Hospital, a room is filled with Palestinian women from Gaza and their newborn babies. One of the mothers got pregnant with twins after 7 years of infertility. But when she developed complications late in the pregnancy, her Gazan doctor sent her here for emergency treatment just before the war started in October. Today, her twins, Abdullah and Odeh, are healthy 5-month-olds.
I'd like to go back to my home, and if it was safe to go back to northern Gaza, I would be the first one to go back. But it's not safe. My husband said it's better if I don't come back, even though he hasn't seen his children yet. And where can I get diapers and formula? I'm very scared.
These women and their babies, as well as 11 cancer patients in nearby Augusta Victoria Hospital, had already packed their suitcases because they were supposed to be returned to Gaza last week by Kogat, the Israeli army unit which deals with Palestinian civilians. But Physicians for Human Rights, along with 2 Israeli human rights organizations, appealed to the Israeli Supreme Court, which granted a 30-day stay while Kogat explains its reasons for transferring these patients. An Augusta Victoria cancer patient is concerned about his grandchildren in Gaza, but he's afraid it will be impossible to continue his treatment there.
Gaza is destroyed and it's very dangerous. There is no way to get treatment there. The Red Cross is taking patients out of Gaza and Israel wants to send us back. How is that possible?
Kogat says it is only sending back patients who are not in need of further medical care. But Physicians for Human Rights says Israel is putting them in danger by sending them to a war zone.
After chemotherapy and radiotherapy, the body is usually, even if you don't necessarily have another treatment for the next 2 months, for example, your body is still weak, your immune system is weak. And as you know, in Gaza, the whole healthcare system is under collapse. There's no functioning hospitals. There's no doctors are overwhelmed. They cannot treat the cancer patients are being sent abroad.
Treatment for Palestinians at East Jerusalem and Israeli hospitals is entirely paid by the Palestinian Authority. The director of the Augusta Victoria Hospital, Dr. Fadia Trash, says that some of his patients have lost family members and homes during the fighting in Gaza. He hopes patients will be allowed to stay at the hospital until there is a ceasefire.
There is a catastrophe in Gaza. From all the points of view, there is no food, no electricity, no water, nowhere where they can live in a decent way. There will be refugees in Gaza, refugees with cancer in a place in war without enough supplies.
He says more than 750 cancer patients from Gaza had been scheduled to come for treatment in Israel since the war began. Most have gone to other Arab countries, but some are not getting treatment at all, and they don't know when or where they will find medical care. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, East Jerusalem.
Meanwhile, protests in Israel continue over a law granting military exemptions to ultra-Orthodox Jews. The Israeli parliament issued legislation to make military service for them compulsory, as it is for other Israeli citizens. Most ultra-Orthodox oppose military service and threaten to topple the government if forced to serve. We go back to Linda for more from Israel.
Since the beginning of the war in Gaza on October 7th, Israel has called up nearly 300,000 reservists. This was in addition to the regular standing army, in which almost 90% of Israeli Jewish youth serve. In contrast, among ultra-Orthodox Jewish young men, only about 3% are drafted into the Israeli army. This almost blanket exemption from the draft was granted to the ultra-Orthodox so they can study the Torah in religious institutions instead of doing military service. But it is now the subject of heated public debate.
Public opinion polls clearly demonstrate that Israelis care deeply about the issue of recruitment and are deeply worried about the exemption for the ultra-Orthodox community, exemption from service. This has been the case before October 7th, and now, given the war situation and the increasing burden on the serving population, this is extremely disconcerting for the majority of the population.
The exemption policy was initiated when the State of Israel was founded over 75 years ago. Then 400 ultra-Orthodox students received exemptions, while last year that number surged to 66,000. Israel's Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that these exemptions are discriminatory and demanded that successive governments compel the ultra-Orthodox to be drafted. The court says the change must be made into law by the end of March. But ultra-Orthodox parties are an essential part of Prime Minister Netanyahu's hardline coalition, and they are threatening to bring down the government if their military exemptions are canceled. Israel's chief Sephardic rabbi declared that if a law is passed to draft all ultra-Orthodox men into the military, the men would leave the country. Ultra-Orthodox demonstrations against the army draft have been stormy and sometimes violent.
They want us, the Orthodox people here in Israel, to go to the Israeli army. They have one intention. They want us to be not religious. Therefore, we prefer to die. We don't mind going to prison. We prefer to die and not go to the Israeli army.
The ultra-Orthodox live in insular communities, completely separate from secular Israeli society. They say that going to the army could tempt many of the young men to abandon their religious way of life. But there are some voices in the ultra-Orthodox community who favor military service, as long as the army would provide strictly kosher food and keep men and women separate.
It's not sustainable to hold such a big community in such a small state that are not serving in the army, and especially after October 7th. We need the soldiers. The army need the soldiers. So we need to find a way how to let Haredim join the army, and serve in the army like everyone, and from the other way, keep their identity and way of life.
While the debate rages on whether to end the ultra-Orthodox military service exemption, Israeli lawmakers have proposed increasing military service for both regular and reserve soldiers. This has brought renewed protests against the Netanyahu government and further raised calls for the ultra-Orthodox to share the burden. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
There's a lot to unpack in the decades-old tension between Israel and the Arab world. It's a history marked by delicate diplomacy both in and outside of the region. VOA Fresh Freedom correspondent Robin Guess spoke with David Makovsky. He's the director of the Koret Project on Arab-Israel relations at the Washington Institute. The conversation aimed to better understand the forces driving current conflicts. He joined us from his office in Washington, D.C.
It's clear that a core position of Hamas is they want to see the northern Gaza reopened to them during this 6-week pause. And that is where the rubber meets the road in a certain way, because Israel's view is, wait, we don't want Hamas reconstituting itself. So my hope is there will be some compromise that, let's say, women, children, elderly people can go back to northern Gaza. No one could say that these are people that are leading the reconstitution of Hamas. There's more facial recognition software in terms of if there were Hamas people going through these blockades. But Hamas is saying, no. We want no checkpoints. We just want everything to be status quo ante, essentially. And that's where Israel and the United States, as far as I know, think that's not realistic. So can the U.S. come up with a compromise that would allow women, children, elderly to return during this 6-week pause? I think that's kind of where the talks are at. And so far, that is the Hamas position is, we'll only stop if you let us reconstitute ourselves. So this is a problem.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made good on a promise to shut down the Al Jazeera network in Israel. This was made possible by a new law allowing the government to ban foreign networks seen as threats to national security. We get more from Jerusalem.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wrote on X he intends to act immediately in accordance with the new law to close what he called the terrorist channel Al Jazeera in Israel. He said Al Jazeera acted against Israeli security, actively participated in the October 7th Hamas massacre, and incited violence against Israeli soldiers. Israel's parliament, the Knesset, passed the law with a 71-10 vote.
I announced that the bill to prevent foreign broadcasters from harming the state security, an interim order during the Operation Iron Swords until 2024, was accepted in the second and third readings and will be entered into the law book.
Al Jazeera condemned Netanyahu's incitement claim as a dangerous, ludicrous lie, and the network said it holds Netanyahu responsible for the safety of its staff and offices. The network, which has more than 430 million viewers worldwide, said it would continue what it described as its bold and professional coverage. Israeli media analysts say they believe the new law is justified.
People around the world don't realize that Al Jazeera is state media of Qatar, and that it promotes a very hostile agenda to Israel. There have been many incorrect reports throughout the war, and they wanted to prevent further harm.
But Hoffman adds the ban's impact may be more symbolic for the Netanyahu government, which is facing vehement protests from both outside and inside Israel.
It has a 45-day limit, and while it can be renewed, it's only supposed to be used during war. And Israelis hope that the war will end soon. I expect this to be something that will be used once with great fanfare. Al Jazeera will continue to broadcast from here.
The U.S. administration weighed in.
A move like this is concerning. We believe in the freedom of the press. It is critical. It is critically important, and the United States supports the critically important work journalists around the world do. And that includes those who are reporting in the conflict in Gaza.
The new law comes as Qatar is trying to broker a deal for the release of dozens of Israeli hostages in exchange for a temporary ceasefire. Some analysts said the new law could complicate those efforts. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
Despite facing threats, members of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian faiths gathered for an interfaith dinner marking the end of the daily fast for Muslims during Ramadan, the fast of Esther for Jews, and the New Year, or Nowruz, for those who celebrate. VOA's Nilofar Mughal has this story narrated for us by Bezan Hamdrad.
Sounds of the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, ring out from speakers inside a Jewish synagogue. This is a scene from a multi-faith gathering marking Ramadan's fast breaking for Muslims, the fast of Esther for Jews, and the New Year, or Nowruz, for those who celebrate it. Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt says this year's gathering is different from the previous years.
The world has changed very much since when we had the iftar a year ago. There's a war that's broken out between Israel and Hamas.
Despite increased uneasiness over the Israel-Hamas conflict, more than 100 people attended the meal, organized by the American Muslim and Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council, or AMWEC, in collaboration with the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. Organizers say fewer Muslims showed up at this year's interfaith Ramadan event, citing conflicting viewpoints on the Israel-Hamas war. Event speakers, however, stressed the importance of fostering interfaith engagement in the United States, combating anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, creating an atmosphere of mutual understanding, and putting an end to divisive language between Muslims and Jews. For Nilofer Moghal in Potomac, Maryland, Bejan Hamdard, VOA News.
Before we leave you this week, we have a new segment called USA Votes 2024 to update you on the U.S. presidential election. As NATO marks its 75th anniversary this week, the world's largest military alliance and America's role in European security are issues that separate presidential candidates Joe Biden and Donald Trump. VOA correspondent Scott Stearns has more.
75 years after its start, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization remains the most direct U.S. engagement in European security. Founded after the Second World War, NATO originally joined the United States and 11 European nations in promising to come to each other's aid if any one of them is attacked. Then U.S. President Harry Truman.
If there is anything certain today, if there is anything inevitable in the future, it is the will of the people of the world for freedom and for peace.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine, NATO's response, and what it says about America's role in European security separate U.S. presidential candidates Joe Biden and Donald Trump. When he was president, Trump told NATO leaders they were not paying enough for their own protection.
The one that benefits really the least is the United States. We benefit the least. We're helping Europe. Europe unites and they go against a common foe. That may or may not be a foe. Can't tell you that. But there are other foes out there also.
5 years later, Trump told a campaign rally in South Carolina that getting tough with NATO members worked.
NATO was busted until I came along. I said, everybody's going to pay. They said, well, if we don't pay, are you still going to protect us? I said, absolutely not. They couldn't believe the answer. And everybody, you never saw more money pour in.
NATO has grown since the Trump administration. Sweden and Finland joined the alliance in the last year or so, in its biggest expansion since the fall of the Soviet Union allowed Eastern European countries to join NATO. Biden says standing up to Russian aggression together shows NATO is working.
Before the war started, I told Putin that if he invaded Ukraine, NATO would not only get stronger, but would get more united. And he would see democracies in the world stand up and oppose his aggression and defend the rules-based order. And that's exactly what we're seeing today.
As president, Trump prioritized relations with Russia and Vladimir Putin. Campaigning for a second term, he recalled a NATO leader asking about Russian threats.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
Biden says that approach to European security is dangerous for America.
A former Republican president tells Putin, quote, do whatever the hell you want. That's a quote. A former president actually said that, bowing down to a Russian leader. I think it's outrageous. It's dangerous and it's unacceptable.
Trump told the conservative British television network GB News that he backs NATO if everyone pays their fair share.
If they play fair, if they start to play fair, America's there.
Yes, 100%, 100%.
Thank you.
Biden says NATO is stronger and more united than ever and is central to the foreign policy goals of his re-election campaign. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
Catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA Plus. I'm Steve Karish. We'll see you next week for The Inside Story.